Hi, everybody. Welcome to our LinkedIn Live event today. My name is Paul B.J. Ransbury. I am the CEO at Aviation Performance Solutions. Keep in mind that we're simultaneously broadcasting today on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. So if you have a problem here on LinkedIn, feel free to jump over to one of those feeds or just come back to this link later. This discussion today is going to be immediately available on demand as soon as we wrap up here shortly. Today the topic is solving the loss of control in flight puzzle, why every piece is important. I can't think of a better expert than Captain Philip Adrian, the CEO at MPS in the Netherlands, to talk to us today about that topic. MPS is a leading manufacturer of A320 and Boeing 737 series fixed-base simulators, and they have two factories, one in the Netherlands and one in Germany. They partner with training organizations, OEMs, TDMs, and they provide tailored, innovative training solutions. Just a little bit on Philip before we go over to him. He has 13,000 hours of flight time. He's type rated on the 737, the 777, and the 787, and also acted as an instructor on those fleet types. He spent most recently, before coming to MPS, as 11 years at Boeing, where he was a 737, 737 MAX chief technical pilot, and then his final position was as Chief Pilot Regulatory Strategy. Prior to that, he was a captain on the 737, a TRI, TRE, and had position as the head of training. And Philip started his career in the Netherlands at the Royal Netherlands Air Force. We had an opportunity to fly some fast jets in their inventory. So before we jump over again to Philip here, let's just talk a little bit about how his expertise is relevant, if it isn't obvious already. Well, he had some significant positions in the industry, a couple of which are that he co-chaired the FAA's Aviation Rulemaking Committee on Upset Prevention and Recovery Training, and he chaired the ICAO LOCART, which stands for Loss of Control Avoidance and Recovery Training Aviation Rulemaking Committee, where he had the opportunity of taking the industry through a process of determining the most effective and optimum approaches and methods of overcoming this threat of loss of control in flight. So Philip is a great guy, a true professional, long-standing friend, and I'm just looking forward to the presentation today. So Philip, let's hand it over to you, then we're going to get together in about 20 minutes where we're going to take on some questions.
Thank you, BJ, for that introduction. And ladies and gentlemen, good day from wherever in the world you're watching this. My name is Philip Adrian. I've been the chair of many rulemaking tasks regarding loss of control, and I'm honored to speak to you with regard to the loss of control in flight puzzle that we need to solve and why every piece is important. This all started based on the Air France 442 accident and the work that was done at the Royal Aeronautical Society under the leadership of Dr. Sunjo Advani in the ICAO group. The ICAO group was the International Committee for Aviation Training in Extended Envelopes, which brought together experts from both the technical and the training side to address some of the restrictions, the limitations, and the current training paradigms that we were training under, to ensure that the next iteration of loss of control prevention would be done the right way. The Royal Aeronautical Society was the sponsor of this, and this led into several other efforts. One was the Federal Aviation SPA ARC. SPA stands for Stick Pusher and Adverse Weather Aviation Rulemaking Committee. That was based on the loss of control event at Colgan, the Colgan event in Buffalo, New York. The rulemaking task was requiring the FAA to assemble an expert panel with regard to the source of that event. I was the co-chair of this together with Captain Lou Namath from CAE, and the tasking there was to address this under Part 121, commercial air transport in the U.S. We came out with a report with regard to our recommendations, which we presented to the Associate Administrator for Aviation Safety. And we also identified some issues that needed to be addressed at a larger level. One was that the tasking for the SPA ARC was specifically with regard to Part 121, but as we identified in our report, you cannot start at the end at the professional level without having a solid foundation Plus, we also saw the need to have a global coordination. So with help from Rob Burke from the FAA and Henry DeFalk at ICAO, we did a joint ARC, which was never done before, which was called LOCART, Loss of Control, Avoidance, and Recognition Training, which was sponsored by ICAO, therefore setting global standards and recommended practices. But it was joint effort between ICAO and the FAA. And that ARC led to the global acceptance and publication of documentation for recommendations in the future of upset prevention and recovery training. The document that came out of that was used for, among other EASA rulemaking task 581, 582, which I had the honor of chairing as well. And that actually implemented many, if not all, of the recommendations that were found in the manual that you see on the screen, the Manual on Airplane Upset Prevention and Recovery Training, ICAO document 10011. This is the basis for global rulemaking. As you may or may not know, ICAO is not an actual regulatory body, but they provide the standards that then will be interpreted and integrated into a local regulatory organization, such as FAA and EASA. And within EASA, we had two taskings, one for recurrent training and one for implementation of upset prevention and recovery training as a whole. Now, the document 10011 takes a more coordinated approach, and that's also why we identified this presentation as all pieces of the puzzle need to fit in. The integrated training concept will address academics, and then it will address practical training both on the aircraft prior to type rating, during licensing training, as well as the use of simulation in type rating and recurrent training. So this document was the basis to ensure that we had a total systems approach and to reinforce the benefits between academic training and the practical training. What you will find in ICAO document 10011 are many recommendations, but we are aware that you cannot solve everything with one solution only. I was told one time, if the only tool you have is a hammer, then every problem looks like a nail. And we wanted to make sure that we provided our audience, which is aviation safety as a whole, with a larger toolkit, so that it's not only the nail we're trying to hammer in, but we're reinforcing the benefits of academic training, the knowledge, and that is especially essential in the upset prevention part and the part where you're not necessarily building the skills, but where you're understanding how to prevent, because that is in the end the ultimate goal, but also the necessary basis that the academics form for the on-aircraft and the simulator training. The awareness part, loss of control threat, those kind of things are necessary for the students to comprehend the environment that they'll find themselves in. We do a great job in training, operating within the normal envelopes, but outside the normal envelope, beyond first indication of stall, some things are slightly different or maybe completely different. We also talk about energy management, crew coordination, and in the document ICAO 10011, we have also provided recovery templates. Those recovery templates have been integrated by the major OEMs into their operational documentation and training documentation. But for those that do not have such documentation, flight crew training manuals or stuff like that, those recovery templates should give you as a training organization or as an individual undergoing this a good indication of the logical steps in recovery. So that's the basis for everything. But then in the end, we do know that there are restrictions, and this is where our recommendations from LOCART came with not only an academic part, but also with practical training. Now, the practical training can be split in two parts. Really, you have practical training on the airplane, and you have practical training in the simulator. I'll come to the simulator in a little bit, but what is the reason for the on-aircraft training? One of the things that we do know is that it is difficult for people to imagine being upside down with the ground staring at them and then pushing instead of pulling. Those human factor issues are sometimes not in any way, shape, or form replicated in any other event. You can talk about it, you can study it, but feeling it, feeling the G-load, feeling those kind of things are very important. The other part is the aerodynamics. Depending on the aircraft you fly, there might be role reversal issues past stall, there might other things. And as much as we know about aerodynamics, there's also some stuff that a picture speaks 1,000 words. So we found it important to have a strategy and a baseline for pilots to have not only the academic knowledge, but also the on-aircraft experience, have the understanding of how you can end up in these kind of situations, and if not preventable, how you can get out of them. Because in the end, we can give everybody the academic knowledge, but we also have to give them the resilience and the confidence in their own abilities to recover from these unprecedented situations that still lead to the highest loss of life category in aviation safety. So we need to do something from the basis. And in the EASA rulemaking effort, we have now integrated that into a requirement for on-aircraft training as an entry requirement for the type rating training. Now that ties me right into the simulator training, because these simulators, they are not the airplane. And believe me, we have had many discussions on the value of motion versus non-motion. But in the end, we all agree that the airplane itself, the commercial air transport airplane, whether it's a Boeing 787, an A350, or an Embraer or an ATR, those are not available and they are not suitable training tools. So to reinforce the academic knowledge that has been built up about generic upset prevention and recovery training during the licensing training of the pilot, we now see the need to provide them with type-specific information. And the way I always explain this is, how does the airplane talk to you? This is not in any way, shape, or form a way to learn how to stall a 737 or how do you respond when you stall an A320. This is type-specific information. How does the airplane communicate to the pilot in trying to prevent this from happening? And if all else failed and you were not able to prevent, what are the right actions for you to take once you find yourself in that situation to safely recover from that situation? So we have the available solutions of fixed base simulation as well as the full flight motion level D simulators. The fixed base simulators have their function in finding the right procedural solutions, finding the right crew resource solutions, and the indications on the PFD, the audio cues that you would get. Some airplanes call out stall, those kind of things. The motion is not an added value. Now, in the end, the motion cueing that a level D simulator provides will give you additional benefit in recognizing, for example, the stall buffet of your specific airplane or the responses. However, there is some recommendation by one major airplane manufacturer to even train this off motion, because we are aware that the initial cueing of the motion of a level D device is very accurate. However, the continuous cueing is not there, and therefore it could lead to some negative transfer of learning. I'll leave that at this point to the questions that we'll probably get on this further. But in the end, it is a blended solution that we recommend and that we have incorporated in the EASA rulemaking efforts and other places in the world too, where you have a combination between academic training, that is generic. You have on-airplane training to identify the aerodynamic capabilities and restrictions, as well as the human factors. Then you have type-specific approaches through the use of simulation devices. And in the end, this is a perishable skill, so it doesn't stop at the type rating. It is something that will come back during recurrent training, whether it's under the FAA mandate for extended envelope training, EET, or under the EASA mandate for UPRT, upset prevention and recovery training. You will find this coming back in training exercises. The one part that we need to understand is that, and this is a slide that I used for my speech at Watts a couple of weeks ago, the task to tool approach that many of you have heard me speak about will identify the correct tool for the objective that you need to reach. Sometimes training in a Honda for starting, stopping, turning left, turning right is a lot better solution than training in the Ferrari, where you can do high G cornering. And therefore, we need to understand that during different phases of the training, during different phases of a pilot's career, different tools can be used that are available and accessible, and therefore also an accurate representation of the training objective to be achieved. Too often in aviation, we go back to the Ferrari approach in training and forget that many of these building blocks, the Lego kind of blocks or the puzzle pieces, are all trained at different levels. So therefore, I once again employ that we need to train on the right tool for the right objectives to be achieved, whether they are task-based or competency-based. The right tools will help you achieve the highest level of safety. And with that, back to you, BJ.
Well, Philip, that was great. I think my arm's tired from taking notes during that presentation. That was excellent. I noticed that we truly have a worldwide audience here today. I'm just looking down the list. We have the Middle East and Dubai. We have Europe from Germany, Southern California, United States, Sierra Leone, West Africa, Colombia, Brazil, South America. So really a wonderful turnout today for an important topic. So anything you wanted to add at all after the presentation, maybe that you thought of while we're waiting for questions to come in?
So one of the things, there were two slight mistakes that I made in the presentation that afterwards you always think, oh, I talked about LOCART as loss of control, avoidance, and recognition. That is because even though it's, of course, stands for recovery training, recognition is such an important part. What we cannot miss in this whole thing is, and that was when we were roaming the halls of the FAA and ICAO as well. One of the points that we made is we hoped that 20 years from that point in time, nobody would ever have to talk about recovery no more. Recognition and the ability to avoid this situation should be the primary objective of all this training. So that's one. And of course, I talked about Air France 442 rather than Air France 447. My apologies for that. That's a mistake I'll probably never make again. But overall, it's important for the audience to understand the different levels of implementation at local regulatory. But I think it's important to understand where this all comes from, where this stems from, and what we're trying to solve.
Yeah, and and I think if I circle back to the title of the presentation, the LOCI puzzle, where every piece is important, there are a lot of pieces. There's been a lot of work done, and I think the part that excites us, because we're now our third decade in doing this full time, is that since it came out in 2014, every single resource that I've seen published from a regulatory authority or ICAO is really good guidance. It's harmonized. It's reflecting the same approach, how to overcome the threat. Now, prior to that, that wasn't the case. Everybody kind of had their own way of approaching it. So I think from that standpoint, even though there's a long way to go, is that we're lining things up for success in that respect. So
And
there
maybe
is,
if I may add,
yeah, go ahead, please.
one of the things, I think we were thinking that we were safe. We did our approach to stall exercises, all those kind of things, and we pretended to be safe. And with more knowledge comes more understanding of what we didn't do, what we didn't have, what we didn't see. So I think that's one of the parts of a loss of control in-flight prevention is also the awareness and the discussion that we have created in this. And I really like what you have set up as well, is to keep it under people's attention, because a big part of avoidance of loss of control is the awareness that it can even happen. So I commend you on an APS on having these kind of series to keep it in front of everybody.
Yeah, and I think it's important. Thank you for saying that. And to circle back, what you had mentioned about is the layers of mitigation are critically important, right? And you could almost, as opposed to saying recovery is never important, I think the point of it is saying is it's a layer of redundancy that pilots should have if they ever need it. But the goal of industry and the training should be for them never to need those elite skill sets. And so, one of the things that we find in our program is that it has, a robust, effective program has to be founded in awareness, prevention, and recognition, to your point. But we've also found that the recovery training really is a wonderful mind map so that they understand that mental modeling of understanding how something can escalate so they can see it developing, intervene at the appropriate point. Then, of course, as we know, the recovery builds experience. They've been there, seen that in the on-aircraft part. It's the human factor side of it, startle, surprise, and a point that you made for a pilot to still be able to be resilient in a crisis, in a real situation. They have to have experienced that with the human factors present. And so I think there's a long way forward on that. Now we have a couple of questions, and they came in from YouTube that I'm going to bring over. This is from Tobias. He hasn't told us where he's from yet, but it's a good question because you talked a lot about the regulations that are in place. And, Tobias's question is UPRT recurrent training legally required? So we talk a lot about, I think everybody perceives, the FCL regulation in Europe, and also the 121 requirements in the United States of being largely initial training. Did you want to comment on that from your perspective, since you are so involved in the EASA implementation on that, Philip?
So it's a great question, and it's not an easy answer. So the requirements under EASA are that on-aircraft training is required prior to entering a type rating. So commercial ATP holders without a type rating will need to undergo on-aircraft training under EASA regulation as an entry requirement. There is no recurrent requirement for those that are not type rated. There's only an entry level requirement to enter into the type rating. However, those that have a type rating and are operating under commercial air transport in Europe, they have a recurrent training requirement. So it is an answer to part of the question that, and it's also a regulatory difference between the FAA and EASA. Under the FAA, currently there is no on-aircraft training requirement, and therefore for the commercial ATP holders without a type rating, there is no such requirement at all. I don't know if that answers Tobias's question.
I think it does, and I think it's important. And the beauty about the harmonized regulations, or at least it's all working from the same playbook, is that on-aircraft training is tremendously valuable. But, the law of primacy prevails, right? Is that how people learn first is remembered best and longest. And the beauty, I believe, of the harmonized approach where you're integrating simulation at type rating initial and recurrent in the simulators, as long as it's reinforcing that, I think the recovery templates are essential to that harmonization as well. Correct. I do believe that is going to be a substantial mitigation of the on-aircraft upset training done properly and in a harmonized way, and then complemented throughout the career of the pilot thereafter with alignment is going to be very powerful. What are your thoughts on that when they do arrive in a situation at an air carrier where there's not only type rating initial, but recurrent thereafter?
Yeah, so as I said in my presentation as well, this is a perishable skill. We cannot just do a one and done or say, well, yeah, I flew an airplane upside down one time. This has nothing to do with aerobatic maneuvering. This has to do with overcoming your possible urges to do the wrong thing. As I said, it's kind of weird to have a face full of ground and still be pushing those kind of things. The on-aircraft training takes takes a lot of that guesswork out of that, and in the end, the type specific issues, those kind of things. It is important to reinforce the right procedures, the right templates. As I said, the manual 10011 has the basic templates, but the OEMs have those incorporated in their upset prevention and recovery handling as well. So those are the kind of things that we need to continuously reinforce, because this is not, once again, to stall an airplane. This is, how do I overcome that startle effect to be resilient and do the right thing? And that law of primacy there is important, and it needs to be reinforced on a recurring basis.
I love it. No, that's right on the money. And in fact, Carrie, who is out on the chat stream there, I think Philip will get her to just go ahead and post that manual, the ICAO manual, online there for a link for folks to take a look at, because it really is very, very well done. It's a great guide. And it's not just about recovery techniques. In fact, there's 11 sections to the manual that talks about all the way from G awareness to human factors. Recovery techniques are part of it, but it's a small portion of what the solution looks like and a new, robust approach to overcoming the threat of loss of control in flight. There's a couple more questions here, actually from YouTube largely, so that's kind of cool to see that coming in from a different stream. Transferability, Philip. We've kind of alluded to it, and I think we've said it without actually saying it, and what we're talking about is how important is transferability. So we actually do have, let me actually bring up Tobias's other question here, because I think that it's gonna, you'll see why I'm talking about transferability when you read it. His question is, how realistic is on-aircraft training in a transport category airplane? So maybe to save Philip this point is that we're not talking about going up in a 737 and doing upset prevention or recovery training. The on-aircraft training is done in a suitable aircraft, to Philip's point, appropriate for the task and the objective of the training, in a surrogate airplane where the instructors are specially trained to focus on the transferable concepts and techniques to mitigate negative training and negative transfer of skill. So to that point, you can see the question there, Philip, but how important is transferability in your judgment in this entire process of academic training, on-aircraft training, non-type specific simulation, type specific, and so forth? So I'm giving you a chance to think about it. What are your thoughts on that?
So the transferability, and I think what we have to separate is the transferability of the strategic approach to recovering from an upset to the airplane specific behavior. The transferability is important to overcome some of the human factors. As I said in the presentation, the on-airplane part also addresses some of the human factors, and it is less about the airplane and it's more about the person. If you look at it, the tools that are used during on-airplane training are most often aerobatic airplanes that are able to put you in a situation where you find yourself upside down with G-load, face full of sand, and it will reinforce your procedural approach, your strategic approach to this whole thing. Whether that airplane responds exactly like the airplane you're going to fly, first of all, we don't know, because this is early on in your career, and therefore we don't know whether you're going to fly a fully fly-by-wire protected airplane, or you may be going to be flying a business jet or whatever. So that's one part. The intent of the approach, of the building block approach, is that the strategy translates, and you can always take something back. But then the reinforcement for the transport category aircraft will be done by identifying the type specific characteristics, and that is done through that simulator training. And an extra 300 will not tell you stall, 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 where an Airbus A320 will. an extra doesn't have a speed tape indicator that will start blinking, but your airplane may. So take from it what you need, but don't underestimate the importance of the type-specific characteristics that are part of the simulator training. And that's where you can't see one without the other. You have to have the basis and the approach, the strategic way of solving these kind of things, as well as the preventive part. And then you have to understand how your airplane talks to you, so you can prevent it at almost all costs.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important. And I think, in modern times, and, we're, kind of briefly, for example, at APS, we have the academic preparatory training, distance learning on aircraft while they're here with academics. Then if they're a jet pilot in a jet, then into non-type specific simulation. Then we use virtual reality as kind of a pseudo type specific training platform, more of an environmental transfer. But the point of it is every piece matters. To kind of circle back to the topic of the discussion, if you leave something out, you're leaving a gap in your mitigation. And so it's important to realize it's not just an academic only solution, although academics are fundamental to the foundation of your capabilities.
Correct.
Academics without practical expertise also is, but you can't just jump in an airplane and learn a few techniques and think that you'll actually revert to those in a crisis. So there's a robust approach to training that needs to be taken to accomplish that. In fact, we have Carrie here online. Maybe what we'll do, Phil, is have her post. There was a document written as a follow-up to the ICAO manual that talks specifically about the on-aircraft dimension of that. So if there's providers out there that are looking for maybe a few more insights on the on-aircraft side of it, how to select the airplane. Philip's point is, if you have maneuvers that can be done in a normal category airplane, then certainly, by all means, do that. That's the fundamental principle behind basic upset training in Europe. But, if there's certain maneuvers that require an aerobatic airplane, then, you need to fairly consider that in consideration of the risk and what you're trying to accomplish. So we'll get Carrie to put that up as well. Are you able to stay a bit longer, Philip?
I am. Great discussion.
I'm curious about what your thoughts are, since you led the initiative in Europe about getting on-aircraft training in place prior to type rating. What are your thoughts about the FAA and the United States, since we have a few people here? Is the United States ever going to go down the path of doing that? And if so, when? And if not, why?
We truly hope so. The recommendations from LOCART were global recommendations. The ICAO recommendations are standards and recommended practices for all 193 countries. And we're happy to see that many of these countries are actually following the lead that we gave at ICAO and integrating this in a complete approach. The tasking, and I spoke about it in the presentation a little bit, the tasking of the FAA based on the Buffalo, New York Colgan accident was to find a solution for the Part 121, and it was a stick pusher and adverse weather, and the expert panel should talk about upset prevention and recovery and stall prevention and recovery. We came back to the Associate Administrator for Aviation Safety at that time, and when I speak about we, is Lou Naaman and I, and we identified that you cannot expect to be training commercial air transport Part 121 pilots without having a solid basis. And the concern at the FAA at that point in time was that there was a significant risk for loss of life during this training, and they didn't want to basically offset the loss of life by preventing a loss of control accident on a commercial air transport airplane by having many people be at risk during the training phase of this whole thing. Now, it's one thing that we have taken in consideration and put significant safety measures in the EASA rulemaking. The biggest preventive measure for loss of life during training is the quality of the instructor. The quality of the instructor is the primary risk mitigation together with the QMS of the organization itself. So we believe that under EASA we have a very balanced approach where we've also identified all kind of risk mitigation issues with regard to airspace usage, with regard to organizational oversight, And we do hope that the FAA will implement this as well. But at this point in time, we do not see any visible information from the FAA that they're about to take this. So it's important for people to understand that doing the right thing does not necessarily always mean follow the regulation and don't do what's not in the regulation. It is identifying for yourself where your safety mitigation is. So even in absence of FAA regulations, it is something that we recommended from an ICAO perspective, and we believe is incredibly important to solve this issue.
Awesome. I think that's a great answer to that question. And I think that's a very prudent way to approach it. So maybe what I'm going to bring up this question while you're doing that and having a look at it. It's a good one from Rodrigo. I think he's in Dubai joining us. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get Carrie, if you could post on here what's called the Every Pilot in Control Solution Standard. It's a standard that was created by APS that's freely available to any implementator of on-aircraft simulator training on how to approach it in a way where all the parts matter, so to speak, like we're talking about, is how the instructor plays a primary role, the intensity of training, regulatory requirement, the right tool for what you're trying to accomplish, and the importance of initial and recurrent training. And that's a great resource if you're looking at doing it right, if you're looking at actually putting training solutions in place to save lives. It's a great guide to approach that. And so that's why we created it, for those wanting to do it right, and that's not filling an export. So to the question by Rodrigo, is extended envelope mandatory for full flight simulators under FAA and EASA? And you know what, let me just leave that with you. I have a lot to say on that, but why don't you go ahead, Philip? Why don't you address that? Because I think you and I are aligned in our perspectives on extended envelope value and then its prevalence. Go ahead.
So maybe a little bit of history. As I said, the FAA Stick Pusher and Adverse Weather ARC had the specific tasking to address full stall prevention and training. Under ICAO, we identified that full stall training is not a requirement, and under EASA, full stall training, contrary to popular belief, is not a requirement. It is a recommendation that is supported by, when you want to do full stall training, then you should have a simulator that is qualified for such training. The development of these packages, I was at Boeing at that time, and we took significant flight test data. The development of these packages puts in some roll-off that was not there, accurate buffet. However, what we have seen worldwide is a different approach. The answer to the question is, under FAA for EET, yes, you do need the package. For full stall training under EASA, if you choose that, you need the package. If you do only go to a stall event, which is approach to stall, or whatever you call that, it is not a requirement. What is important to understand is why you're doing it and what you're trying to prevent. My personal opinion, and I hate to bring that in because it's not about me, but my personal opinion is that as we're not teaching pilots to stall, why are we teaching them all the way up to the stall? If we can prevent this at all point in time, then we should. However, the recovery skills should be taught and should be reinforced at all time. Now, the other part of this is that the OEMs have brought together the approach to stall and stall recovery under a single template. So do the right thing as early as possible to prevent loss of control is what you need to be learning. And the data package should be supportive of that. But once again, this is a task to tool approach. So maybe that's a very broad answer, but in there was a little nugget on the actual certification requirements of the simulators as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Philip. Yeah, I know in the United States, 121.423 extended envelope training requires 121 air carriers to have extended envelope training at the full stall or actual stall. And so with our, for example, when we license United and Delta Airlines, we have a tremendous amount of experience teaching full stalls and advanced simulations that are certified to do it. But when you actually look at it, the rest of the parts of operations, United States, 135, 125, 91, don't have the opportunity to do that. But in all honesty, as a provider that all we do is upset prevention and recovery training, honestly, the extended envelope simulator offers a few percent of an increase in the training value. To your point, if you're teaching the proper template, if you're teaching approach to stall, the same as full stall, the pilots are getting the skills and the disciplines to get focused on angle of attack first and not minimizing altitude loss. And I think that's, it's an important part of the process. So I think that was a really good question. We're looking at the time here. Why don't we just end questions there? But Philip, why don't we circle back to you for maybe final thoughts and comments, and take as long as you want, then I'll just wrap it up with a few thank yous here.
So one thing that I've been stressing ever since I've gotten involved in this is don't wait for an excellent technical or technological solution to start your upset prevention and recovery training. We're all looking for, the best flight simulation device, the best virtual reality, all this. This is a real simple approach. You can start this as soon as your student, or as a student, the first time you look at an airplane. The intent of all flight training is to prevent you from crashing. It's that simple. So all the knowledge, all the skills, all the experience that you can build, whether it's in an airplane, whether it's by reading aviation reports, whether it's whatever, all this adds to your knowledge, and you put it in your little backpack, and it creates resilience, and it creates an awareness that leads to a reduction in loss of control. So don't wait for a technical or technological solution to start upset prevention recovery training. Start as early as you can, do the right thing, and do it consistently. And don't think that once you've done it, that you're safe. Continuously update your knowledge, continuously update your skills, and make sure that you're not caught unaware.
I love it. But those are great words of wisdom. And I think the only thing I'd like to leave with emphasis on is the critical role of the instructor that you brought up already, Philip, is that there are plenty of effective training devices out there to address the full mitigation that ICAO has envisioned, from on-aircraft to academic to non-type specific, type specific, but it really fundamentally falls to the instructor to understand how to focus on the transferable concepts and mitigate or eliminate any of those features of that particular platform that don't transfer. So it really does require an expert instructor to do this at all levels. So I'm excited. And, not that long ago, we didn't know that, right? 10 years ago, people weren't giving the focus on the instructor that they should now, and now they are. So with that, Philip, thank you for your time today and being here. It's just an honor always to see you and work with you. And I know that everybody got a lot out of your information and your expertise today. And a big thank you to the participation of everybody around the world and being here. It's really what this is all about. And I think the beauty of the LinkedIn Live and YouTube and Facebook and even Twitter is that these discussions that we have endure. They're online, on demand, at any time that people can watch and come back to. So it's an ongoing resource. So with that, Philip, thank you, sir, for being here. And everybody out there, thank you for being here. And we'll see you next time. Take care.
All right. Thanks, everyone.